Have you been feeling the effects of stress, burnout, or anxiety at work? Listen to the Anxious Achiever podcast to rethink the relationship between your career and your mental health. Get the Anxious Achiever wherever you find your podcasts and walk away with practical advice you can implement today.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by SAP. SAP Business AI. Embedded across SAP solutions, it drives immediate impact. From Joule, your digital assistant, to AI-powered capabilities portfolio-wide, make confident decisions using your own data. SAP Business AI. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
LinkedIn presents.
Happy Wednesday, my friends. I'm Michael Kovnat. This is the Next Big Idea Daily, quick masterclasses from the best new books written and read for you by the authors themselves. Hit the follow button to subscribe and sign up for one of our newsletters using the link in the episode notes. So today's question, are you a horse person? Some people just can't get enough of horses, and I get it. They're magnificent animals, and they serve our species faithfully as transportation, laborers, companions. But did you know that horses may be responsible for civilization as we know it? It's a fascinating story, and it's told in the new book, The Horse, A Galloping History of Humanity, by Timothy C. Winegard. Timothy is an associate professor of history at Colorado Mesa University and the New York Times bestselling author of 5 books, including The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator. Here he is to share 5 key insights from his latest.
The domestication of horses on the windswept grasslands of the Pontic-Caspian steppe of Ukraine and southern Russia around 3500 BCE was nothing short of an equine revolution in transportation, traction, trade, and war. Riding the first generations of domesticated horses, plundering Indo-Europeans spilled out of the steppe and quickly overran the Eurasian expanse from the Atlantic Ocean through Europe and India to the western frontiers of China. Beginning around 3000 BCE, the relatively egalitarian, peaceful, and gender-equal societies of Neolithic Europe and the Indian subcontinent were rapidly and completely replaced with the hierarchy, customs, genetics, and language of these mounted Indo-European marauders. This wholesale remodeling established a more militaristic, capitalist, male-dominated culture that has been both the bane and the blessing of Europe and its former global empire for millennia. As a result, Indo-European is now the ancestral language for roughly 3.7 billion people, or 46% of our global population. In addition, within a few generations, Indo-European DNA accounted for an astounding 40 to 50% of the total genetic fingerprint across Europe. More telling is that almost all European males have Y chromosomes from these mounted invaders, while between 60 to 90% of men now living in the Indian subcontinent can trace their patrilineal DNA and the caste system to colonizing Indo-European horsemen. During their conquests, Indo-Europeans also introduced the smoking of psychoactive marijuana to Europe. Complementing archaeological evidence, during the 3rd millennium BCE, derivatives of the Indo-European root word for cannabis, canna, spread widely across Indo-European branch languages. While blazing their way across Eurasia, mounted Indo-Europeans also kicked off a fashion revolution. There is a direct correlation between horseback riding and the origin and widespread adoption of pants. The oldest recovered pair of purposely fashioned trousers, dating to 1300 BCE, belong to 2 trend-setting mummified Indo-European horsemen unearthed, with cannabis paraphernalia, in the Tarim Basin of China's western Xinjiang province. In addition to propagating their language, genes, and male-dominated ethos, this transformative, history-defining Indo-Europeanization of Eurasia also disseminated domestic horses, wool sheep, wagons, chariotry, bronze, pot, and pans across a significant portion of the planet, with ripple effects that have not yet subsided. The horse and the downfall of indigenous plains peoples. Contrary to popular belief, the wholesale adoption of the horse, following its reintroduction to the Americas by Columbus, by indigenous peoples of the Great Plains, notably the Comanche and the Lakota Sioux, was not a sociocultural benefit. The horse corrupted the lives and societies of indigenous peoples and facilitated their downfall and subjugation. The common perception of the horse as the sole positive and uplifting element of the Columbian Exchange for indigenous peoples, fitting apologetically into narratives otherwise filled with disease, desolation, and death, is not accurate. Horses had been absent from the Americas for roughly 10,000 years, long enough that from an environmental standpoint, they were as much as an invasive species as cattle, smallpox, Europeans, and tumbleweed. The introduction of colonizing horses upended intricately evolved grassland ecologies, contributing directly to the collapse of bison populations. The sweeping adoption of an equestrian culture by indigenous nations also undermined traditional military, economic, egalitarian, gender, and social conventions. These were replaced with bison fur-based export capitalism, divisive social, gender, and economic hierarchies, and unremitting intertribal warfare, transforming the heart of the prairies into a brutally contested war zone awash with the blood of bison, horses, and human beings. As a result, bison populations began to dwindle by the 1830s. To feed their bison-based economy, the Comanche, for example, harvested at least 280,000 animals annually, with peak years reaching 574,000. Dwindling bison numbers were further pushed to the precipice of extinction by spiraling ecological pressures triggered by the introduction of horses and cattle whose diet, including sparse water resources, overlapped with bison by 80%. From an estimated pre-Columbian population of 60 million, by 1890, only a few thousand bison remained. The battle for supremacy and survival in the American West was not just being played out amongst rival indigenous peoples, settlers, and cavalrymen, but also by cattle, horses, and bison. This cultural upheaval was compounded by ways of cascading disease. The horse accelerated the delivery of deadly pathogens to which indigenous peoples had no acquired immunity. From 1730 onward, an epidemic of smallpox, often escorted by other lethal pathogens, ripped across the plains every 10 to 20 years, shattering indigenous populations who entered the paternalistic and bleak reservation era. Betting the Farm, the Horse and the Birth of Hollywood. In 1872, former California governor and railroad magnate Leland Stanford made a wager with some friends. Although he had no visual proof, he was convinced that all four hooves of a horse were off the ground at the same time while galloping. His pals believed otherwise. Stanford's two passions, aside from money and politics, were wine and horses. He owned 2 vineyards as well as breeding stables for racehorses at Palo Alto Stock Farm, now Stanford University, still known colloquially as the farm. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, who had sought an answer to the same question, new technology and some ingenuity on the part of Edward Muybridge, an eccentric and unconventional English photographer hired by Stanford, finally caught up to the horse. It was the embryonic age of photography, and each glass plate had to be wet-coated immediately prior to snapping a picture, significantly impacting shutter speeds. This made it impossible to take successive rapid-fire shots. That is impossible with only one camera. On June 10, 1878, Muybridge set up a row of 12 single-lens cameras at 27-inch intervals on a track at Palo Alto against a white backdrop, to contrast with the galloping dark horse named Sally Gardner. Muybridge laid across the track a series of electromagnetic circuits and tripwires attached to the camera shutters to time the consecutive exposures to record a virtually instantaneous chronological sequence. Muybridge printed the serialized photographs on a round glass plate. By spinning this disc on what he called his zoopraxiscope, which projected the images in a repeating loop on a screen, Muybridge, Stanford, and Sally Gardner gave birth to the motion picture with the pioneering 3-second clip dubbed The Horse in Motion. Stanford also won the $25,000 bet and affluent bragging rights. All 4 feet of a horse are off the ground during each stride, collected under its barrel as it switches from pulling with the front legs to pushing with the back. And so Hollywood began with horses and a bet at the racetrack down on the farm. The Great Manure Crisis of 1894. New York City was sinking in shit. The metropolis and its 3.5 million residents were being swallowed by the surging contamination and accompanying communal health problems produced by their indispensable personal, public, and commercial transportation. Instead of greenhouse gases and